so Corey, who's the lead author of this paper, she made a really good point where she said, you don't actually know what downstream effects a piece of knowledge will have. Like you could imagine in your head, like, oh, I shouldn't share this because of the effect it's going to have. But you may not really be accurately predicting what that effect could possibly be. So who are you to say what the future's going to need?
Welcome to the Rogue Journal Club, where we tear studies apart so you don't have to. The Rogue Journal Club is a ScioSophia production, featuring long-form discussions of peer-reviewed studies published in academic journals and their connections to society. I'm Adrian.
And I'm Gina. We'll be your hosts.
A journal club is when academics at universities get together to talk about papers.
But we've gone rogue. We're going to do Journal Club our way. Join us.
On this episode of the Rogue Journal Club, we review and discuss the article Prosocial Motives Underlie Scientific Censorship by Scientists, a Perspective and Research Agenda. The article appeared in a 2023 issue of the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and the first author is Corey Clark. Sweet. Back at it again.
Here we are. One more before the holidays.
One more before the holidays. Speaking of, Merry Christmas. Happy
Yes.
holidays, all that jazz. We are festive. For those of you listening, obviously you can't see it, but oh well. Go watch it.
I just realized I blend with my background. I should have like a green background so there's contrast, but couldn't think of anything. We literally just I saw Adrian's hat, I got jealous, I put my hat on. So
you just made me think like green screen. You do a green screen back there with the snowfield behind you and the whole works.
Oh, yeah.
That'd be fun.
That's fun. I do kind of want to build a green screen for like our music videos and stuff. So maybe there will be a green screen in the future.
That'd be fun.
All right.
That'd be all sorts of fun. So this is one of those times for us that we picked an article that is suddenly quite prominent, actually. This was very timely when it came out. Because I think it was published like right before Thanksgiving. So we're getting this in within a month of when it was published. So let me put that up here for our viewing audience so they can follow along with which article this is. So this is the one we have. Some of you may have seen folks tweeting about it. You may have seen news articles about it. You may have seen all sorts of things, but entitled Prosocial Motives Underlie Scientific Censorship by Scientists, a Perspective and Research Agenda. And actually, there we go. I'm going to say the author list is quite a who's who, I noticed. I don't know if you had the chance to look at all the authors.
Yeah, I didn't realize until just now that Steven Pinker is on it. Yeah, he's a favorite of mine. I read a lot of his books, especially the ones about writing. They are excellent. And he soothes my soul as a style curmudgeon. I'm like, yes, I found my kindred spirit. But yeah, he's definitely a mind. So. Oh, Roy Baumeister's on this paper. I didn't know he was still out there. He's controversial. He's the guy that wrote the popular books, Is There Anything Good About Men? So he's got a reputation. Huh?
I did not know that he wrote that.
Yeah, I actually read Is There Anything Good About Men a long time ago, before I had left the left, as they say. And it made me really angry. It made me very, very upset. And I cried actually over it. And I think wine was involved. It was not pretty. But then there were aspects of it that just like sat with me. And I said, but he makes actually some good points. And it's interesting now looking at it from the other side. So, yeah,
no,
I didn't agree with everything, but I think he wrote some things in a way to be provocative because it was a popular book, and his anger toward feminists, I think I understand. At least I read anger toward feminists into the tone of the book. So it may not have actually been there. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but Yeah,
Mm,
interesting. I did not notice that until just now. I'm like, "Oh, well then.
yeah, no,
Okay."
yeah, and folks may remember from Side Chat Saturday the name Lee Jussom here, who is also one of the authors,
Oh, yeah.
the famous fiddling pirate, actually on Twitter. I think he that's
Fiddling
what
pirate.
his avatar is, the dark fiddling pirate. So he's just like on
That's
Twitter.
awesome.
Um,
He Oh, and well, the lead author is Corey Clark. She was in that call too. The blonde
mhm,
girl? Yeah. Okay.
mhm.
So,
And yeah, like other folks like Musa Al-Gharbi, who's a very prominent sociologist and very critical of a lot of things. He's keeping track of that kind of stuff with censorship for a while. Michael Bailey, Nicole Barbaro, I know because she's actually behind doing the Heterodox Academy surveys of campus free speech and expression.
hmm.
Uh, a few others in here, um, like
Oh, yes,
actually,
your friend, Miss Anna, Dr. Anna Krylov is on here, I just saw.
yeah,
So,
she
good
definitely
deal,
is.
good deal.
So this really spans the gamut because Anna's a chemist and Corey and Lee are both psychologists. So this really spans the gamut of who was on here professionally.
Yeah.
Um, like Glenn Lowry is here too. So just like of all the
Yeah, you're
posts,
right.
this was a who's who of authors.
Yep. Cool. There are even papers that I like. I still always have some kind of curmudgeonly, cranky thing to say about it. Hence my Karl Popper's Bulldog. Wait,
Sweet.
I'm trying to point at it. There we go. Karl Popper's Bulldog subtitle. But honestly, I actually like the paper and I certainly agree with where they're going with it. There were just some things that I was like sad that with the all-star author list that it wasn't better in certain ways.
I can agree with that. I can agree with that assessment. I thought it was very well written. For the most part. Again, some little things here and
Yeah,
there, much like you,
right.
with that. But I also thought some things were perhaps a little bit lacking in not thinking about some of, well, maybe they just didn't have space because I think PNAS has some really short, really, really tight word limits, you know?
Ah,
So I think
yeah.
I'm not 100% sure if it's them or they just didn't have space. Um, you know what I
Yeah, and
mean?
yeah, and I think some of my criticisms kind of come from the fact that this is meant to be a communication between social scientists and not meant to be public communication. So the people who they're writing to may be aware of what studies they're talking about when they cite them. So I'm going to say that up front is possibly an explanation, but I'm still going to point the stuff out anyway because I think it matters for other reasons.
So do you want to read the do we want to read the abstract first and then hit our sort of three top of the line kind of notes on it,
Yeah.
or
Yeah. Yeah,
okay.
do that. That works.
The abstract. Science is among humanity's greatest achievements, yet scientific censorship is rarely studied empirically. We explore the social, psychological, and institutional causes and consequences of scientific censorship, defined as actions aimed at obstructing particular scientific ideas from reaching an audience for reasons other than low scientific quality. Popular narratives suggest that scientific censorship is driven by authoritarian officials with dark motives such as dogmatism and intolerance. Our analysis suggests that scientific censorship is often driven by scientists who are primarily motivated by self protection, benevolence toward peer scholars, and pro social concerns for the well being of human social groups. This perspective helps explain both recent findings on scientific censorship and recent changes to scientific institutions, such as the use of harm based criteria to evaluate research. We discuss unknowns surrounding the consequences of censorship and provide recommendations for improving transparency and accountability in scientific decision making to enable the exploration of these unknowns. The benefits of censorship may sometimes outweigh the costs. However, until costs and benefits are examined empirically, scholars on opposing sides of ongoing debates are left to quarrel based on competing values, assumptions, and intuitions.
That last line, I feel like needs to just be in somebody's email signature. Like as you communicate with your academic colleagues, that last line or, the last 2 sentences, I guess, for context, should be, like, in an email signature that everyone sees on a regular basis because it captures the problem so well that just what these conversations tend to sound like when you're trying to make any kind of headway with a person who, is on the so-called opposing side
Mm.
of the topic, DEI being the topic. So, yeah.
Not just DEI. I'm sure there's a lot of things where that might be the case.
Yeah, a lot of things for sure. Um, but yeah, so we have this thing where we're trying to stay organized, and I had suggested earlier that we each come up with our 3 main points that we want to get to, and just in case we don't get to them all, at least they've been mentioned once, or maybe there's some overlap because Adrienne and I didn't discuss this before we started recording, so I don't know what her things are going to be. She doesn't know what my things are going to be, so we might find some overlap. So,
I'm
if you
probably
do you
gonna
want to
find
go first?
them down as I think of them. So maybe you should go
Ah,
first so I
I'll
can
go
find.
first. Cool. I'll go first, you search. Okay. So at the start of every podcast, I've decided that I'm going to say these 3 things because they're the things that I say in every episode, and I'm just going to say them at the beginning, and then the message will get across, hopefully a little better. So everybody needs to read Karl Popper. That's the first thing. That's what I say all the time, like a broken record. Second thing, journalists are the ones causing most of the problem, in my opinion. Sorry, journalists, but that's what I think. And then 3, the internet is bad for your brain in general. So a little bit ironic given that this is happening on the internet, but so Rogue Journal Club is totally not bad for your brain. It's the only thing on the internet that is not bad. I'm just kidding. It's all terrible. Okay. So don't
No,
listen
no,
to this
no.
podcast.
There's some of it that oh gosh, who said it? Who said it? I think it was an old MythBusters episode where the host, Adam Savage, said something along the lines of nothing would be, no one would be more thrilled than I if the internet was a reliable source of information, but it is simply not so. It's an information minefield full of some good stuff and a whole lot of nonsense.
Yes, that is very true. So yes, exactly.
I think the only reason
So
I
my
remember that I've been rewatching MythBusters episodes.
oh yeah, those are awesome. I love that show. A real classic of the internet. So okay, so my 3 points about the actual paper though. So I have this written down as so many weasel phrases, OMG, and I will elaborate on that as we go. Uh, it's not actually something that I think is intentional or sloppy or any indicator of the authors not being intelligent or talented or any of that. I think it's a habit that comes from academic writing. Um, so there's a bunch of things that bug me. So I have some examples, but it was kind of throughout. And then second is I'm glad in the section entitled Distinguishing Scientific Rejection from Censorship was there. That was a very important section, and I super appreciate that they explained to the scientists how their field is supposed to work. um, and then I have one caveat for that I'll get into, which is unsurprising because it's the thing I say in every episode. And then the third was I wish there had been more original data in the paper. It kind of made me wish that this was a survey write up or an audit report or something. And it was a lot more speculative than I had realized it would be. So hopefully they intend to write up uh, the thing, but it looks like maybe it's in a conference proceeding. They cited that. So I don't know where they're headed with this, but anyway, it was encouraging to see that there are other research groups besides them that are interested in this question based on their reference list. So that's all.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would take the last one. I'll take the last one first in that what I got from it was slightly different in that, wow, I didn't recognize there was actually such a lack of actual peer reviewed research on this. You would think the
Yeah.
behavioral scientists of all people would be would be interested in this, or the folks who are studying science itself and transmission of knowledge and things like that would be interested in that topic, but that's kind of what I drew from this, and that there's a lot of anecdotal data and survey data and things like that, but there's not really peer reviewed studies, or a lot of them specific to scientific censorship. Let's put it that way. And
Yeah.
that's the conclusion, bottom line, that they came to at the end of the paper is like, we need data, need a lot more data.
Yeah.
And this is
You all right? Oh,
Piper, what happened?
cat interruption.
Sorry, guys. So let me explain what the heck happened, because I'm sure our audience is now at this point completely confused.
As
So
am I.
I have a desktop computer, so I have a giant CPU tower that's sitting under my desk here. And the cats do like to sit on it because it's, spinning. It's nice and warm when it's cold, right?
Mhm.
I think Piper was trying to get onto my legs, which are under the desk and next to the tower, while she was sitting on the tower, and she slipped
Uh-huh.
off, sliding down my legs. That's
Ooh,
kind of why
not
I was
comfortable.
confused. But she
Yeah.
was fine. She actually didn't stick her claws in my legs. I was just totally confused for a minute. I was like, "What the hell is
Oh,
going
yeah.
on?"
Like, what's happening down there?
Darling, are you okay? Yep, you're back up on the tower. Okay. Sorry.
Indeed.
Um, so there was that. The other thing is that I got out of this is, I also agree with you, the distinguishment of rejection versus censorship. I'm really glad they got into that, because the with so many of the anecdotal things and the intuitive stuff, and the intuition stuff and what have you, there is right now a bit of a tendency to conflate I got rejected with somebody censoring me, and not a lot of clear distinction in there where there
Yeah.
should be. There needs to be that. So I
Yeah.
agree with that. The other one I got was just a really broad thing, and it was the first immediate thing I wrote was, scientists are human. Congratulations. That's one of the things you've told us is scientists are just as human as everybody else.
Yeah.
We do have a tendency to be upset with things that go against our own proclivities,
Yeah.
and what have no less than anybody else. And I think there was a line somewhere where they were talking about how people, how scientists are not immune from the same proclivities as any normal person.
Yeah.
Um, so that's one of the big ones that came to mind for me. But those are my top of line kind of 3
Yeah.
points I got from the paper. But
Cool.
where do we begin?
Well, I can go through my examples of the weasel phrases because that's something that might pop up again. So I call them weasel phrases because they're like the things that you say, like some say this, or it is said that, or it is
Oh, yeah.
purported that, and it has sort of like a ghost as the subject, and it's not always clear like who's saying it or where that information comes from, like the claim. And so you get around that by having a little citation after it. And so you assume, okay, that citation is going to clue you into where that claim came from. But the problem with doing it that way is it's not always clear what's in that citation. They sort of make a like an interpretation and then cite it rather than explaining what the source actually said. So there's a couple of examples. So citation 28. Let's see, where is that? It came after I highlighted it, I believe, in the paper. It's on page, wait a minute. I'm going to just go right to it with Control F magic. So it's on page 3, and it's at the end of the first like main paragraph of that page, the one that starts with a third class exerts influence informally.
Oh, that one, yeah.
Yeah. So citation 28 came after a sentence that says, institutions also fear reputation and financial damage, and so individuals inside and outside of academia can use whisper campaigns and social media to pressure institutions to censor, and wealthy donors can threaten to withhold funding to do so. And so I expected that citation 28 was going to be something that showed examples of this occurring, but it actually just pointed to another paper that simply speculated about these things maybe occurring, just like this one. So it was almost like
Mm.
kind of a pointless citation. It was just like other scholars think this too, but your mind, when it sees a citation, is like, oh, there's examples of that, of wealthy donors withholding funding. There's actual citations about whisper campaigns, and I wish there were. I imagine those things would be very hard to have in a peer-reviewed paper, but if you read that sentence, you're going to think that there's a lot more evidentiary weight behind that than there actually is. It's a speculation, and that's one example of this happening many, many times throughout the paper.
Mm.
Um, and that it's like a writing quirk that really bugs me, because it meant that I had to go look up that paper and see what it actually was. And I wish that the authors had done that work for me by saying, other scholars have speculated that this also might be the case, or um, you know, a book chapter such and such. These people, something that explains what kind of data that is. Um, and it's even more salient in another example, which I even agree with, but because it feels true. But I know for a fact that we don't have a lot of good hard data on it. And it's at the top of the next page. And it says most modern academics are politically left leaning.
Well, hold on a second.
And that citation number 74, I was like, oh, we have data on that. So I went to citation 74, and I found that it was another kind of speculative piece. And the data that they were referring to is not from that paper, but it was mentioned in the paper. And the two sources of data on that are Jonathan Haidt asking people to raise their hand at a conference publicly, outing themselves as conservatives, and an anonymous internet survey. And as social scientists, they should know how flawed such data is. And if you're going to talk about it in your paper, you shouldn't just say most modern academics are politically left leaning, full stop, as though that were like actually known. But you should mention, we don't have really solid data on this, but a
Well,
couple of instances mentioned in such and such et al. So I don't like that
so
that
yeah,
sentence made it seem like it was a harder data than actually is. And so those are just some of the examples of this thing that bugs me. So
okay. Yeah, no, I can see that. And it is an unfortunate quirk. I have observed that too with academics, not just in social sciences, but it's happened in physical sciences too, unfortunately. Um, though I can think that makes it interesting to me because see, I know there are particularly this one you just mentioned. I know there are studies that have explicitly surveyed what what groups what are the academic leanings, and I think fact matter, I saw one just on Twitter not too long ago, where they were actually showing that, like, there's like 56 to 0 ratio of left to right in this field or something like that. I have seen those kinds of surveys. They do
mhm,
actually exist. And it does support the notion that is here.
yeah.
Most of it does that academics are politically left leaning for the most part. Um
Yeah, I
so
don't think the claim is wrong.
yeah, it strikes me strange that they wouldn't go find that now that you've said that because there
Yeah,
is data to actually support it. You didn't necessarily need this particular paper. And of course, obviously, we'll just say this because it's distinctly possible some of the authors could watch this later. Um, kind of thing.
sure.
If we have something wrong, feel free to tell us.
Yeah, and
We're
I mean,
constantly
I know about somebody that did a study on academics' campaign contributions, and that also revealed a bias towards the left as well. So there may not be like one study showing this, but there's a lot of things that you could cite in a big old list that are a little bit better than raise your hand at a conference and an anonymous internet survey. There are better sources for that information. And I
yeah.
point this out mostly because when I read stuff about this topic, and this is like the only topic I've read a journal article about, and probably since I left my career. So this is the only thing I've been reading papers about, is like for our show. And I keep seeing this happening over and over. So I put on my far lefty hat when I read these things. And like, if I was the other side of this, what are the things that I'm going to zero in on and poke at as like a weak case for the problem? Because one of the things you really want to do when you're trying to make change like this is to make like an airtight case for what you're pointing to as the problem. If you're going to write a persuasive paper like this, then that's kind of what you need to do. And I just thought that was weak. If I was a lefty, I would point at that and say, well, actually, there's no way to know that actually they're left wing. You know what I mean? Like that would be the thing that I would go after. A lot of other things too. And so I think that was the issue that I had with that other paper you sent me a long time ago, where I was kind of mean to the authors a little bit, because I was like a little, maybe having a cranky pants day or something like that. But it was, I was putting my angry lefty hat on again, and basically trying to pretend that I was on that side to see
Right.
what I would consider vulnerable for
Mm.
attack in the argument. Now, if I agree with them that I think, I mean, it feels true, most modern academics are probably left leaning, like that's probably like kind of a dirt duh thing. It's very obvious if you're in academia that it feels very true. It would be nice if there was a large data set on that. So I guess there's a bunch of smaller ones.
Yeah, no, I'd have to go dig it up on X again because I do remember seeing it. And I actually said it for once. I said it was X and not Twitter. That is astounding. I keep saying Twitter instead of
Wow,
X, so that's astounding. Um
that's funny.
I'd have to go dig it up because I do remember seeing it that some folks have done that larger scale survey of different disciplines, and there was, I literally saw it just the other day. I can't remember who did it, or who put it up actually, because it was a graphic where you could see, it was arranged so the bar got larger as you went to the bottom. It was one of those kinds of
Yeah.
arrangement graphics, but it was talking about the ratio of left to right leaning professors in a discipline. And it might have been based on like one or two colleges or something like that, but at least it's something, you know, it's
Yeah.
something more than just raise your hand or an anonymous online survey or something like that, which those do have their value, but I can kind of agree, just at least acknowledge the caveats of that, you know.
Yeah. And
Now, sorry, let
it
me,
may be, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, sorry about that. Let me finish one point, but I will go with I will give them a little bit of a break in one thing, in that you and I talked about it at the beginning. We actually don't know off the top of our heads what the word limit is for PNAS. And so I,
Yeah.
I have to give them a break that they might have been trying to meet the word limit that way. I still would have been like, can you just give me a little more in caveats? But I can understand that as a problem when you're trying to get a journal article published.
Yeah, that could be. I think so. I guess to explain all of those things really well you can't do, but I wonder if you wouldn't increase the word count by all that much by just changing the way that you say it in maybe just a couple more characters or the same number of words. It could, it depends. I mean, obviously, I can be an armchair critic. It's easy for me to say I didn't put all the work into the paper. This is what you do. Science trains you to be kind of like, at everything. But I think it's important to be writing about this, and I don't want to act like I know better than someone who does this professionally, because I don't, and I don't want to be that person. So, and it may
Yeah.
very well be that all the people who read this know exactly which studies they're talking about, and I just don't, because I'm an outsider, and so that's another factor to consider.
Yeah, I mean, and you and I are both outsiders to this topic specifically, with the exception of, both of us having been in science at some point, or still in, or how I think I'm
Yeah.
still a scientist. Am I still a scientist today?
Yeah, you're maybe also Santa Claus, but
Well,
in general, in general, scientist.
but I'm Science Santa. How about that?
Yes.
Um, but the no, and I think we should preface this, I think, because I think these are really good critiques that you're giving, and that I agree with you on the critiques. But I think all both of us agree with the premise of the article in that there's a lack of research on this topic to begin with, and there
Yeah,
needs to be, and the authors are trying to highlight that there needs to be more about it.
yeah, it's definitely hard to study things that, for example, how could you study that whisper campaigns occur? How could you study that wealthy donors are withholding funding? How would you know that that was the reason that funding is withheld? It's like all these things that are plausibly deniable, and you just are going off of hunches and professional body language and tone and clickiness and just kind of all those subtle human things that you're just like you want to be able to write about it in a paper, but you don't have anything that stands up to scientific standards to be able to write about it. So you sort of have to read between the lines. And I respect that it's very hard to point these things out in this format, but
Yeah,
you have to try.
yeah, I mean, definitely, and in this case, it goes back to their own kind of thing of distinguishing rejection from censorship, in that there's not the proper data necessarily to make that distinction anymore. Um,
Yeah.
and with some of the stuff that they've cited,
Yep.
you know. Um,
Yeah. Where's that spot? Oh yeah. So I can hit the tennis ball back to you if you want to do one of your three things, and then we come back because my next one is that. So maybe it'll blend seamlessly.
yeah, I think where I really appreciated the article, because I've gotten more and more curious and interested in science history in the last few years, and so I immensely appreciated the section on historical examples, in because with together with some of the psychology research that they do point to that does talk about, human proclivities for certain things, and wanting to not see things, or what is the word for it? It's, oh, criminally, there's I can't find it now. I'm doing terrible. I can't find it today. But I was looking for it because they talked about the psychology article, the psychology research, which is there and is robust, and talks about the tendency to misremember things, or to remember things falsely if it lines up more with what you think, and
Oh
all of these.
yeah.
I just can't remember where it is in here. I'm blanking on that. But
I know what you mean. I kind of remember that spot. Hang on.
yeah,
You
I can't
keep
remember where
talking
it
and
is.
I'll look for it. We can
Okay.
divide and conquer.
But I really appreciated the historical examples, because I mean, it's a thing that we should remember as much as we try to practice the process of science and to be diligent in getting at the truth. We do have to recognize that scientists have a certain amount of, well, we're all human, right?
Yeah.
We're all human, and we're all subject to the same sorts of biases as everybody else, and just being able to think on a higher level, or to apply Popper's falsification or anything like that, um,
Hmm.
doesn't alleviate that particular part of human condition, from any scientist who's practicing. And I actually really appreciated seeing that, and the reminder of that, with the historical examples, but also throughout when they're talking about the types of censorship, or things like that, which I can get down to that table in a second. But
If you do control F and search bias and science, you'll find the section you're talking about with
thank you.
yeah. It's in the section of distinguishing scientific rejection from censorship. It's like
Thank you.
right there.
Yes, I do know what you're talking
Yeah.
about. I don't know why my control F is being so weird that I'm scrolling all over the place, but maybe this is just the way it is
Mhm.
today. Um,
It's being control F'd.
yeah, here it is. People disproportionately search, share, and remember, even falsely, preferred information. In addition, people are selectively skeptical of discordant information, and more negatively evaluate scientific methods when results are undesirable. Similar patterns occur among scientists. For example, peer reviewers evaluate research more favorably when findings support their beliefs, theoretical orientations, and political views. Scientific papers describe ideological outgroup members more negatively than in-group members. Scholars are likelier. I feel like that's grammatically not correct, but that's a whole other thing. Um,
Likely. Yeah, maybe. I don't
I
know.
think more likely is the correct grammar, but I'm not 100% sure. Scholars are more likely to reject papers ostensibly written by little known authors than identical papers ostensibly written by prominent authors. In an analysis of scientific papers, 96% of statistical errors directionally supported scientists' hypotheses, suggesting a credulity among scholars toward favorable outcomes. So, things like that. In other words, I can simplify it in one very short phrase. Scientists are human.
Yep.
Very human. Um,
They
and so
forget that. They like to think that they're just brains that whose legs get them to and from meetings, but we are full humans after all.
I want to put that statement on a shirt. Scientists are just brains with legs that get them to meetings.
I can't take credit for that. I read it somewhere else and I forgot who it was. So honestly, it could have been Steven Pinker for all I know. It sounds like something that would have been in one of those books that I read of his, but I don't remember who it was. It was
Oh,
someone cool though.
I still want to put that on a shirt somewhere.
Yes.
Maybe I'll ask the folks at Woke Screen to turn that into a shirt for me.
Yes.
But yeah, it's really important for us to remember that because like seeing this and being reminded that scientists do these things too does mean that just because we have the scientific method and Popper and try to adhere to that, it doesn't mean we are immune to the
Mhm.
kinds of particularly soft censorship that's in here. And thank goodness for this table because this is a great table for looking at
Mhm.
all that. Because this is the kind of thing. It's the soft censorship that is far more likely in an academic environment and in scientific publishing and the like than the kinds of hard censorship where you just use power to say no to something. Whereas in the other
Yeah.
cases, more social ramifications and this goes to another psychology thing. We do really like to be liked by people. Really, is
Yeah.
what it is. So, and we like to be welcomed by our peers as we do research. So
Yep.
it is a thing of it is a real thing, and humans are not immune to doing that.
Yep.
And scientists are certainly not immune to doing that. So that's one of the kind of main pieces that I was thinking of when I read this article, which yeah, it's funny because it shouldn't be an earth-shaking kind of thing, and yet sometimes we need to remember these things, so maybe it's quasi
Yeah.
earth-shaking at the same time, but,
Well,
simplest way I can think of to summarize the entirety of the article is,
yeah.
scientists are human.
Yeah, and our training as scientists should help us get around that better than someone without that training. That's sort of the idea. But yeah, it never works perfectly. It can't. That's that's why we have the community of scientists, and they talk about that too, that you can leverage what is it? Intellectual competition can combat bias by leveraging scientists' bias against one another. So you have a different bias than I do, and we both discuss a paper and learn stuff that we wouldn't have learned if we had just been sitting reading it by ourselves. So
Mm,
that kind of thing. Um, yeah, I mean, what was I going to say about scientists being human? Shoot, I forgot my point. But
and actually,
um,
while I'm thinking
yeah,
about it, this one last key sentence highlights something that I have said many times on the channel, outside of the Rogue Journal Club is that when scientists share preferences, competition may support systematic suppression, which is to say, groupthink is bad.
yeah.
Short way
I
to say it.
mean, yeah. The guy, I already forgot his name. I'm looking at the author list. Was it Lee Jussum who was in the
Ye-
episode you sent me? So
Yes.
he has the view that my husband and I share, which is, uh, this kind of intimidation and groupthink. It works if you let it work,
Yeah.
and I realize that there's another view, or like, yeah, if you're the sole breadwinner of a family of four and your scientist career is all you know how to do, you're not going to be as willing to stick your neck out. And if you're, independent and you have other sources of income, or you're confident that you can find another job because you're early in your career, you might be more likely to not be intimidated. But it's also a personality trait too. I think if you're attracted to the tenure track lifestyle, you may actually be a very risk averse person naturally, because the
Mhm.
idea of a job for life is very appealing to a risk averse person. And so you don't necessarily appreciate the intellectual freedom part of tenure. You're more attracted to the job for life part of tenure. And so
Yeah.
maybe that, like, is also why that subgroup of academics tends to be like a zip your lip kind of play by the rules. I want everyone to like me kind of thing. I personally grew up with no one liking me, so I don't really care. I'm kidding. I do. I mean, even though I have that attitude sort of superficially, I do actually care, um, of accidentally being perceived as offending someone, or mischaracterizing someone when I don't mean to. So I'm like, I always have a million caveats, even on the show, where I don't want to, you know. So I
Well,
say that, but
good
I
scientist
don't.
there is what that
Yeah.
is.
I don't want them to come for me either, but I also do care about, uh, like, proper methods. Like, as far as the Popperian critical rationality, I care a lot about that for very personal reasons and for professional reasons. So yeah, it's important to kind of figure out how to balance that, because this ain't the fifth grade science fair. This is the future of knowledge. You're one of the thought leaders. If you're a scientist, your job is to pursue reality and be uncompromising.
The unfettered and zealous pursuit of the truth that defines scientists themselves as somebody's hero and somebody's villain all at the same time.
Yeah, very true.
That is
Oh,
my profound thought of the day.
it was good. There should be like a profound thought sound effect or something. If Kieran were here, he would tell us we needed a sound effect for that.
If maybe that'll be the Christmas present to myself as I get a soundboard for us to work with.
Ooh,
Yeah,
fun. Yeah, that
feeding
would be
around
cool.
and have some fun.
Yep. Um, on the truth thing though, this
Yes.
is where Popper's bulldog comes in. So it made me want to revisit what Popper said about truth. And by the way, if you read Popper, you being the listener or anyone, don't read about Popper on the internet. Read Popper's actual books, because most of the internet sadly doesn't understand critical rationality. So they think that there's paradoxes, and he has addressed all of the common criticisms in the books, and there's thousands of pages of addressing. So if you have any kind of concern or confusion, it's been covered. You just got to find it. So
Yeah.
so he says, so they say, in the distinguishing scientific rejection from censorship, I got to pull that spot up again. Derp, derp, where are you at? Okay, there we go. Scientific truths are built through the findings of multiple independent teams over time, a laborious process necessitated by the fact that nearly all papers have flaws and limitations. When scholars misattribute their rejection of disfavored conclusions to quality concerns they do not consistently apply, bias and censorship are masquerading as scientific rejection. I 100% agree with where they're going with that. I do always bristle at people saying phrases like scientific truth, because it implies, at least to the casual reader and maybe many academics, that certainty can eventually be found with enough work, and it can't. And that is an unsettling reality of the Popperian logic. The only way to evaluate if a scientific conclusion is worth accepting is by the method used to obtain it. But even that never means it's true. It
Right.
means you work with what you have.
Yep.
So that's a little bit of like a pedantic thing, but I see it a lot in these papers that are talking about this general topic area, because obviously what truth is and what conclusions we should accept and how we know things, like, that's a central part of this whole DEI debate. It's like, how
Mm,
do we know what's true?
yep.
And we don't. But it doesn't mean that that means anything is true. It just means that the method of obtaining the knowledge matters. It's the only thing that you can look at
Yeah.
because we will never know if something's true.
Oh yeah.
So I
And of
try
course.
to I try to not say that prove or true ever in my science writing because of that whole thing. It sends the
Mhm.
wrong message. So
Yeah. So no, I understand what you're getting at. Although I'm curious, how would you? I mean, I know
mm,
you agree with the thrust of the
yeah.
sentence. How would you rewrite the first part of that sentence?
I'd probably sit here in my Word document for a while trying to hammer out something, but I think it would probably be something like, scientific knowledge is, constantly being built upon itself through multiple independent teams over time, a laborious process, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then I would add something about how, um, you know, that, certainty um, cannot be found, but the way to evaluate something, if it's worth accepting or if it's of high scientific quality, is how well it adheres to the critical rationality methodology. Um, and that matters a lot when you're talking about bias and censorship masquerading as scientific rejection, because that's a clear way to point out, is this really a quality concern or is this an ideological rejection? You can see that if you look at what the person's criticisms were. If the idea is controversial, but it followed the critical rationality method, then you can accept it, even though it's uncomfortable. So to me, that would have been like a more robust way of talking about that. And of
And
course,
actually,
yeah.
I was going to say now that you because you mentioned it, I'll go down here and bring it to it, and that there's there were a lot of things that they suggested that goes toward that, toward
Oh
being
yeah.
able to provide it so that you could get into that. So like,
I think
request to make it open as possible, where reviews and
yep.
editorial decision letters can be provided in online repositories.
Yes.
So that gives you an opportunity to
Oh,
see.
yeah. I love all their recommendations because it does open it wide open so you can actually look at the method and the reasons. So I see that they know the beauty of the Popper stuff is he didn't invent any of this. He's just describing what scientists were already doing
Mm,
and put some words to it. And so it frustrates me when I see scientists that are writing about the critical rationality method very well, they're doing it, but then when they talk about it, it sounds wrong to me. Like it doesn't match what the actual process is. And so if we could just tighten up the way we talk about how science works. Unfortunately, the public's attention is on journal articles now more than ever because of the internet. And so you do have to be a little bit more careful in how you talk about that, because if you say stuff like truth and prove and all that, it comes across sounding really dogmatic, and then it gives the impression that science is dogmatic, even though the process itself isn't, uh, based on how the people who are succeeding at it are actually doing it. i'm
mm,
sure i'm sure the authors of this paper, that was an all-star list, I'm sure they know this. It's
yeah,
just
it
it
just
just
didn't
there's
come
yeah,
across right.
yeah,
For uh, well, and that's fair, and that may be just a communications thing. And Lord only knows if any of you lovely authors of this paper see this, feel free to leave us your thoughts and commentary or what have you. And who
yeah.
knows? Maybe after the new year, one of them would be interested in being on for a side chat Saturday, and they could really hash that out. Ooh,
Yeah, that would be fun, and I'm open to them telling me that I'm a know-it-all, because I kinda am sometimes, so um, but, that's just I've been a lot more free with my thoughts since leaving academia, and it feels good to be able to be myself and say what I think about things, even if sometimes it comes across as a little cranky. I think I care a lot about these things, so I'm okay with sometimes coming across that way.
well, you're talking about the channel that is raw, unfiltered, and informal science on YouTube. So I be as
Yeah,
cranky and shit on papers and glorify. Well, not well. We
yeah,
don't shit on papers and glorify papers, but we can be as cranky as we'd like to be. Let's put it that
yep.
way.
In real life, I'm actually a very, like, passive people pleaser, so in a way, I'm kind of this is my Rogue Journal Club alter ego in a sense, so
we get into critiquing
Um,
things, but yeah, you and I had the
yeah,
same commentary on the distinguishing scientific rejection from censorship with the fact that we
yeah.
both liked that it was there. So
Yeah, I mean, yes, thank you, authors, for saying that and for teaching your fellow scientists how science is supposed to work. And it's honestly nice too because quacks use that line of reasoning a lot. That science is closed-minded because they won't accept my kooky idea that was basically a hypothesis that I decided was true without testing it, and therefore I'm being censored. I'm like, no, you're actually just being rejected because you didn't do science. You can do some science and then come back when you've done some science. So
mhm,
yeah.
mhm. When I've sat on peer reviews, I've had to can a few articles because I'm like, no, you're presuming a conclusion.
Yeah. It happens a lot, and, it happens so much with COVID and all these other, like, highly public climate's, like, kind of the OG, topic for that. It's, like, ripe for that, so, yeah.
Let's see. Oh goodness, what was our? Excuse me if
We
I've
were talking about, there not being any data. That was actually my only thing was they talked about a survey that they did, but it was looks like it was just, at the stage of being at a, conference proceeding, and I, like, craved for it to be a full paper, and I thought that's what this paper was when you sent it to me originally, but, um
Oh yeah, you're talking about like this from the.
mhm.
Can I get it? Oh yay, I can get it open bigger. Look at that. Um, yeah, it was interesting, and I mean, admittedly, you got to start somewhere, right? And I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing to have something appear in a commentary article before you've gotten the full peer review done. It may the only danger that I could see is you might get some of the people who might be reading the commentary, maybe eventually your peer reviewers, which is kind of a problem because you've like preformed some thoughts about it. So
And you may find some mistakes in your method, and then you've got this thing out there, and that maybe the journalists see this, but then they don't see the correction. That's kind of a common problem.
mm,
But I, the journalists cause a lot of problems in general, so I guess you can't always speak to them. They like looking for outrage fodder, and they'll find it wherever they want to find it. So in a way, you kind of can't torture yourself with that. But I mean, it would be good if the survey had gone through peer review first to make sure that the methods that people agreed that the methods were sound. But I mean, how complicated is this a survey? I think it was a survey, right?
yeah, you're talking about this one, the
The
one on.
468 people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
from this thing.
Let me see.
Oh, oh, okay. I know what that is. That's the Free Speech Union. That's in the UK, I think.
Oh, okay. No, it was a different thing. It was in a more recent survey is the start of the sentence. So
Oh, it's Fire's survey. I see it.
yeah, it's
90.
460 US psychology professors reported that some empirically supported conclusions cannot be mentioned without punishment, especially those that unfavorably portray historically disadvantaged groups.
I don't know
So,
exactly where it is, but
it's on page, oh, I'm looking at the PDF. So it's in the censorship among scientists section. It's like the third paragraph, I think, third or fourth
oh, here it
paragraph.
is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I
And I
was
guess
right before it. I was scrolling back and forth over it like
ah,
five.
it says a majority of these psychology professors in this survey reported some reluctance to speak openly about their empirical beliefs. That's a strange phrase, empirical belief, and feared various consequences if they were to do so. Respondents who believed taboo conclusions were true self-censored more, suggesting that professional discourse is systematically biased toward rejecting taboo conclusions. A minority of psychologists supported various punishments for scholars who reported taboo conclusions, including terminations, retractions, disinvitations, ostracism, refusing to publish their work, regardless of its merits, and not hiring or promoting them. And then compared to male psychologists, female psychologists are more supportive of punishments and less supportive of academic freedom, findings that have been replicated among female students and faculty. And so they cited a bunch of other surveys, which is nice. So there's some data, but I would also like to read those citations to make sure that's actually data, given that there's a bunch of times when I've thought it was data and I've looked at the citation and it wasn't. So
Yeah, I can
given,
understand.
yeah, and I don't know the field, so maybe the people who read that know exactly what they're talking about and they know what the data is. So I'll give them that.
This was Corey's the lead author. It's her own presentation from the FIRE conference.
Oh, okay. So it's a presentation of maybe unpublished data.
Yeah, it might be stuff but this is 2022, so I would hope she would have gotten that published by now, but maybe not.
Takes a long time to write a paper.
It does, and it takes a long time to work through things. So yeah, Nathan Uncut I've heard of, and Eric Kaufman has written a lot for FIRE. And I mean, they're pointing to another problem that they've talked about this. Actually, they're talking about it right here, that most of this has been done by nonprofits, not by not by peer-reviewed journals of anything, or any peer-reviewed pubs. So, oh yeah, I remember this one. I covered this one actually on the channel, and I think it was quite well done in terms of the analysis and what have you that was in there. But again, done by a nonprofit, it never went through
Yeah.
proper peer review or anything with that, to the best of my knowledge. So,
Yeah.
and then 104 to 106 is these three. Value gap, free expression, the K Foundation. What is that? Never heard of
I've
that
never
before.
heard of that.
Yeah, and then this is peer reviewed, I believe, although that might be in a preprint server. I'm not 100% sure on that one. With the
Okay.
Gare et al. So interesting for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely not the wham bam awesome robust data set that you want, but it's something. So
it's something, and yeah, admittedly, that's one of the critiques they have of themselves and of the field somewhat in general, in that there's not data. There's not a whole heck of a lot of data to work with. I mean, aside from the surveys done by the folks who actually think it's important to think about this stuff and work with it, be it FIRE or Heterodox Academy or any of a number of different groups at this point. So it's really interesting because they've pointed to what little data there is, but at the same time,
see, if it were me, and I don't know if this is going to make me sound like a know-it-all, but I'll go out on a limb and do it anyway. If it were me, I would have waited to write this paper for when I had the full survey data analyzed, and I would have made this stuff a lot shorter as a nice meaty introduction to the survey report. And then the data would have been kind of front and center, because there's a lot of things that are very speculative in this paper that maybe could have been left out, and they could have focused completely on what the data was and then built the narrative around what we do know, instead of filling in all these speculations. And I mean, I think there's this trend now that I don't know if I like that much, that journal articles are sounding more and more and more like op-eds every day. And I just really wish scientists would stop doing that. I want to see less pandering to the internet audience and more scientists talking to each other again, and remembering their responsibility to knowledge, and not to set people on the internet straight, because that's a losing battle.
There is certainly a losing battle with that, because you can't get it across in 280 characters. I'm sorry, it's just not gonna happen.
And it seems like you can't get it across in a PNAS paper either. I mean, it's that's why Karl Popper wrote The Open Society, and it's this freaking big. There's a lot of stuff to cover on this issue of how do you govern people? How do we deal with our differences? It's huge. I would say it's probably not worth trying to write these borderline think pieces anymore, because I don't know if maybe the goal is like, well, we have to claim this and we have to write this paper because we need to plant a flag in this research area and say, like, this is a question that we're pursuing. We would like other people to pursue it. I mean, that is kind of where the paper
Well,
in the
yeah,
title it
I think
says
that's where
it's,
that's
yeah,
where they're ultimately going is the
yeah,
notion that, hey, we did this, but we recognize that the data's a little bit kind of not great and not out there. So how do we do this as a research agenda? Which again, it was a surprise and an interesting surprise to me that they that behavioral scientists really haven't, really haven't gotten into looking at this.
yeah,
You would think it would be more there, but it's not. And it goes back to, I covered this a lot in the last couple of weeks from the time of this recording. Um, like there was a recent release from, again, Pew. Take it for what it's worth. It's Pew Research and polling, but um, they're the only ones I know of who have done decently long record recurring polling of the public with regards to how well does the public trust scientists, which has been on my mind for a while. And actually, I mean, if there was one other thing that I could add for what I was thinking about, is I appreciate that they actually put in a fair bit on that issue of what would happen with respect to the public and the issue of trust and downstream consequences for different institutions that rely upon scientific research, whether they like it or not. They rely on it. Those kinds of things. Um, and that's the thing I've noticed with Pew. The longest term thing that I could really find that looks at it, is that public trust in scientists has gone down. It was interesting because there was a little bump in 2020, during the pandemic where everybody went up a little bit. Um, and in this most recent iteration, they found that it's like at 2016, it was kind of a lowish point. Then it went up in 2020 for a little bit. And since 2020, it's kind of fallen off again, where the number of folks who say they have a fair amount or a lot of confidence or great deal of confidence, I think is the language, in scientists to act in the public
hmm
interest in particular, is now lower than what it was in 2016, which
mm. Yeah, I
is
remember
amazing.
reading that 2016 report when I started my writing stuff at Blue Marble. That was a
Mm,
report that I started a big discussion in one of our Slack channels about whether we should consider the percentage of people that trust scientists to be a glass half full or a glass half empty kind of proposition. And so the fact that the glass is emptied a bit more is pretty unsettling, and it kind of means that whatever SciComm is doing is not working. It's going in the wrong direction.
well, and I mean, in light of, for those of you listening to this, and we're taping this not too long after the hearings in Congress with the three university presidents and all of the discussion and consternation that has evolved since then. And a lot of my thoughts since then have dwelt on that issue of trust, but also on what I have noticed. And I commented on this a few times on Twitter. So those of you who are following me at Twitter at the time of this recording would know that was on my mind. But on the fact that there's nary a bit of introspection. Did you notice that there's nary a bit of introspection as to thinking, hey, maybe did we do something wrong here that people aren't trusting us?
Yeah, no, there's definitely no introspection. I was in meetings where I would point this out and would be met with uncomfortable silence at best. There's not there's almost a willfulness about not recognizing it. Like I don't care that I'm alienating them. They are bad people and deserve to be alienated because they have the wrong viewpoint. That honestly seems to be more common of an attitude, at least among science communicators. And I don't know enough about the vibe in science proper, but I know that the science writing on the internet world that I was previously in definitely had that attitude. And I remember often saying, you guys, we have to care what the science denying people that you call them, science deniers, whatever that category of people is, we have to care, because if we don't care and we don't try to learn what someone else who's not us thinks and why they come to the conclusions they come to, you can hold those things in your head without agreeing with them. If we
Mm,
don't care, it's going to get worse, and it seems like it got worse.
yeah. And I mean, if there was a fourth thing I could add to our three, because I think we got through our three, actually. Surprisingly, I think we got through them all.
Yeah, we
But if
got
there
through
was
them all in an hour. Good for us.
organization. Thank you for the brilliant. That was a fabulous idea. So we actually have some organization, because otherwise we tend to just rant.
Like 2 squirrels running around a cage. Yeah.
Oh well, actually, you know what it reminds me of is, this is going to be a tangential story, but I think it fits. When I was in undergrad, I was walking through the courtyard one day, and everybody stopped, and they were all looking up at this tree. And what it turned out to be was these three hawks chasing around for one squirrel in the
Ooh,
tree. That's kind of what
that's
I'm
a
thinking of with some of our rants. Like, one would dive this way, and the crowd would duck, and
oh my god. That's like a bad day for that squirrel. That's
that
terrifying.
squirrel did eventually lose.
Oh, well, yeah, it
Circle of
happens.
life.
Yeah, it's
But
sad.
it's it is the one thing that I really appreciate with this article, that they went into it and considered it briefly, but I think actually carefully, because it's only like 2 paragraphs where they actually get into it. But briefly but carefully, in actually noting, you know, may also reduce public trust in science if censorship appears ideologically motivated or causes science to promote counterproductive interventions and policies. The public may reject scientific institutions and findings. Indeed, a recent investigation found that Nature's endorsement of President Biden, by the way, undermined trust both in nature and in scientists in general. Loss of trust may reduce skeptics' willingness to cooperate with scientific recommendations at crucial moments, during pandemics, for example, causing avoidable problems for public health and safety. A broader erosion of trust in institutions could have downstream consequences for liberalism, pluralism, and democracy. Censorship
Mhm,
may be particularly likely to erode trust in science in contemporary society, because scientists now have other means besides academic journals to publicize their findings and claims of censorship. This goes back to your internet is bad kind of notion right there.
mhm,
If
yeah,
the public routinely finds quality scholarship on blogs, social media, and online magazines by scientists who claim to have been censored, a redistribution of authority from established scientific outlets to newer, popular ones seems likely. Given the many modes of dissemination and public availability of data, prescribing certain research areas for credentialed scientists may give extremists a monopoly over sensitive research. Scientific censorship may also reduce trust in the scientific literature among scientists, exacerbating hostility and polarization. If particular groups of scholars feel censored by their discipline, they may leave altogether, creating a scientific monoculture that stifles progress, which gets actually right back to the other thing I said before: groupthink is bad.
yeah. I mean, sometimes I feel like I've lost trust in the scientific literature, because I think that not enough people actually understand how to do science, and there's a lot of political agendas on both sides that show up in papers that frustrate me, even the ones I agree with. I'm like, yes, I agree with you on a personal level, but don't do it that way. That I feel like I have that thought a lot
Mm,
when I read these kinds of things. Also, by the way, that first sentence that's precedes citation 115 and 116. Citation 115 is a popular book, and citation 116 is a preprint server paper.
mm.
So already it makes me want to be like, okay, well, yes, in theory,
Actually,
I think,
they did the thing in the paragraph after that. They went for stuff that's in newer sources of media. you
Yeah,
know?
wait, I lost it. Hold on a minute. I gotta go back to where it doesn't let you go hit the back button on PDF reader. So I have to like keep searching. Okay. Yeah, they talked about that, which was nice. I'm glad that they at least explained that one. Nature is highly compromised, and a lot of their examples are from nature. So nature, nature communications, nature behavior. Like, oh look, nature is at it again. Nature is incredibly politically compromised. Like, I wouldn't say that that's representative of all journals. I would
No.
say people probably should stop publishing in the brand name journals and go with the technical publications that I think they're just less flashy, so they're less vulnerable to being compromised.
Mhm. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's I mean, actually, and those of you who watched Side Chat Saturday would have seen this particular figure, the figure 2, because actually Lee showed this during Side Chat Saturday. Um, he actually he brought a slide deck with him, and that's what we went through as part of his Side Chat Saturday appearance. So we ended up talking about this, which I mean, it's a good sort of visual representation, you know, when you get into epistemic consequences with scientific censorship, and maybe you're ignoring all this stuff out here that says the thing that has been accepted as true. Obviously,
Yeah.
we're using the inappropriate language here on the Popperian sense. So please,
Yeah.
Carl Cooper's bulldog, just chime in. Um,
Yeah, I think I would say that I like this, but what belongs in the small circle, well, I guess like to me, this diagram, you'd want to actually sort it by like how do you know what which of the stars to accept? It would have entirely to do with the method, uh, and you wouldn't necessarily say it's true. You would just say, um, the total evidence out there. How many of those stars represent good methods, and how many represent crappy methods? And
mhm,
it doesn't necessarily mean the peer reviewed literature has a monopoly on good methods. It should, but I think these days I'm more skeptical of it, sadly, because I just feel sad. It seems like a lot of scientists are compromised, or a lot of papers are written by people who are young and inexperienced, like early career and graduate students write a lot of papers, and a lot of them they're still learning and they're sloppy and they don't learn philosophy of science in grad school, so you can't really have a high degree of confidence. And
yep.
so just because it's in the peer reviewed literature, eh, I don't know, I don't like the word true. I think it's good methods. It's quality methods versus crappy methods to me, not false versus true.
Yeah, I can agree with that in part at least. Although, um, actually, I remember Lee talking about this with me a bit, because with psychology and some of the social stuff, it's a little bit different from the physical sciences, where you could set up an experiment and end up proving somebody wrong if your experiment is good. But like one of the things he points out with the social sciences that I didn't really think about before he mentioned it is the notion that just because your experiment is set up and you don't see evidence of something doesn't mean an effect isn't there with the social
Right.
sciences, because it just may be so small that you can't measure it. That kind of thing. It may be
Yeah.
so little of an effect. Um,
Or you haven't set up an experiment that can detect it. Like it's
yeah.
maybe an experimental design question too. Like maybe you have to just be a little more creative, or maybe there's like a proxy that you can test for instead or something. It just depends on it depends on a lot of things.
Mhm. But yeah,
Yeah.
those are the main kind of things that I had. So I mean,
Yeah.
overall, I was really pleased with the paper, barring some weaselly things. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I I like I was happy to see it when you sent it to me. I was like, "Oh, good. I'm glad somebody's finally talking about this." And I sent it to my husband and his collaborators, or like his friends, I guess. They discuss this topic privately a lot, just like all sides of it. So a lot of people find this stuff interesting, and it's got to get some light shined on it. And if the first few papers maybe are not like my dream journal article, like so what, you have to start somewhere. um I
Oh,
do have some final thoughts, and I actually wrote it down because I wanted to make
oh,
sure I
go
didn't ramble. So I kind of have alluded to a bunch of these things, but okay, as far as talking about the consequences of disseminating certain research results. Like, that problem is not really lost on me. I do think that you can't handle the truth thing is true for some people. Like, there are some things that I think maybe some scientific conclusions the public may, and the public being all of us, the scientists included, that may not be appropriate for mass dissemination because they're still being hashed out, like things that are kind of sensitive. I mean, that's not lost on me. So I had this thought: scientists should stop seeing their papers as news articles and stop worrying about what the public will think of their papers. They need to stop talking to the invisible internet audience and remember that journal articles are technical communications of research results to other experts. The science journalists, however, who scour the journals for outrage fodder, are the ones who should be asking themselves whether it's wise to report on scientific findings that might have social consequences if discussed at the wrong time or in irresponsible ways. It's really the communicators that are burdened with this. I don't think the scientists should be carrying this burden. You should be able to study whatever you want and report on whatever you find, given that your methods are sound. But
Yeah.
whether it needs to be publicly disseminated and shouted from the rooftops and tweeted and X'd or whatever the hell everybody's doing now, that is a fair question. Do we need to make some preliminary controversial result? Like, do we need to have that stick in everyone's mind as, science has, for all the trust it's lost, it's still science. The method still
Mhm.
has a lot of weight in people's minds. That's why quacks love to try to pretend they're science, because they know it gives them credibility to do so. And so science does carry a lot of weight. So if you talk about a scientific finding that says something about a disadvantaged group that's unfavorable, you do have to be careful, um, if when you let that out of the bag. But I don't think having it in the journal is the problem. I think it's having it on the internet, like in the popular sort of discussion sphere, that's a problem, because it takes on a life of its own. It can become dangerous.
Mm.
Like, even if the original idea isn't. Those are
No,
my
no, no.
final thoughts. Is like, I don't think the scientists should be carrying the burden of the censorship. I think it's the communicators that should be carrying that burden.
Yeah. No, I think that that makes sense to me, and that is a fair thing. When do you cross a line with a question that the communication side of it, you have to be concerned and careful about how you put it out there, and also knowing that unfortunately you're probably going to have somebody who goes, because internet being what it is, goes and
Mhm.
finds it anyway and has
Yeah,
their nefarious things with it, even if it is a
yeah.
benign question with it. So
Yeah,
that's interesting.
my statement is more prescriptive than descriptive, in that this is what I wish people this is what I think people should do, but of course internet's gonna internet, and my wish will not come true, I'm sure.
That may well and truly be the case, but I think it's still it's a valid point, and there that to think about, and that may be a whole discussion that we can just have regardless of whether or not we have an article at some point, because there's a lot of
Mhm.
argument now online that I've noticed that scientists should become communicators, should be tasked with that burden, more so than the science communication folks or the science journalists are currently.
Yeah, we could have that discussion, because I actually don't know where I stand on that. I've thought about it a lot, and since I was a science communicator and I left, there was a point where I thought SciComm itself is pointless, because people believe what they want to believe. And if they want to learn about science, they'll come find you. But doing like kind of uh, one way communication, maybe people don't want it. And I was very disillusioned when I left my career. And so I think I've kind of swung a little the other way, and I have a little more of a positive attitude about it now. But it is frustrating to do SciComm in the face of so much bad thinking. And even among science communicators, you feel like you're kind of hitting your head against a wall. So it's hard. And like, yeah. So yeah, I think people have to be careful what ideas they take and run with, and that's worth thinking about. But in that podcast you sent me, what was the guy's name, the host of the show? I forgot.
Maybe Rivkin.
Yeah. So Corey, who's the lead author of this paper, she made a really good point where she said, you don't actually know what downstream effects a piece of knowledge will have. Like you could imagine in your head, like, oh, I shouldn't share this because of the effect it's going to have. But you may not really be accurately predicting what that effect could possibly be. So who are you to say what the future's going to need? I think
Yeah,
that was a completely good point. So
yeah. No, and that's exactly it. As much as it's an innocuous question, you will have no idea what somebody's going to do with it. And to try
um,
and make that guess of what somebody's going to do with it, the you're going to be shooting in the dark, for lack of a better way to describe it. You can't account for every possible way it could be used or misused or abused or what have you. Um but of course then this is where, again, I'll preface this in that we could probably do a whole side chat Saturday just on this topic of communication and responsibility of a scientist and all this kind of
mhm,
innocuous thing. But the thing that I'm thinking of is that I think yeah, my advisor actually asked me something similar to this actually on my written prelims when I was doing my dissertation, and that was, oh goodness, that was almost 10 years ago. I feel old now.
time flies.
But
Yes.
um, but yeah, the he asked me something about that, and at what responsibility does a scientist have for how the knowledge they produce is used or represented by others? Do they
Yeah.
have no responsibility for that, or do they have a responsibility to chime up and say, when somebody uses it wrong, say, no, you're using it wrong. Here's why. That's not what it says. Um, and I think of some contextual examples, like years ago with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying the world was going to end in 2030. Well, the scientists involved with that, because it got such to a furor with it, had to come out and
Mhm.
say, no, that's not what our report says. Our report basically
Yeah.
says, if you don't address greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, you're going to end up with this kind of consequence in 2100.
Yes.
Or we think so. Anyway, a
Yep.
very different meaning, but it got taken up by what is a very prominent who is a very prominent congresswoman, excuse me, who is a very prominent congresswoman, and spoken incorrectly and suddenly put all over the internet. So
Yeah.
um maybe we'll save that for another time, and we can do a whole thing on science communication and that sort of philosophical argument of, at what point do scientists have to say, nope, you can't, that's not correct, I won't let you get away with using my knowledge that way, or the knowledge that I've
Yeah.
produced that way.
Yep. Well, with that, I
Good
am
end.
out of brain. I am out of electrons in my brain. So we can conclude if there are no other things that you would like to say.
No, I think the only things that we can say is, given time of year, Merry Christmas to those of you who celebrate. Happy holidays, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, all that kind of jazz. Happy holidays more generally. For me, it's Merry Christmas, but all that kind of jazz. And Science Santas wish you a very happy holidays. I guess that's what we are this time. We're Science Santas, or
Science Santas. Yeah, here. This is my beard. There we go. No. Yeah.
but yeah, that's the
All
only thing I
right.
can get from this.
Well, it was lovely, and I hope you all enjoyed that. And please go read the paper for yourself. As always, it's open access, I believe, so you should be able to get a hold of full text of it. And let us know in the comments what you think of it and what you think of our thoughts on it. And all will be good. Whatever you have to say.
Alrighty then. We hope you stay curious, everybody. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Rogue Journal Club. If you want to suggest articles for the show, please consider becoming a supporter of ScioSophia.locals.com. The link for the Locals community is available in the show notes. The Rogue Journal Club is a ScioSophia production, copyright 2023.